Several months ago, Bernie Sanders released a plan to make drug prices cheaper. Well, how? Well, by opening up the importation of cheaper drugs from other countries. Well, that makes sense. And look, it wasn't just one bill. It was a bill, and it was an amendment. So he's been trying to put forward different pieces of legislation to essentially do the same thing. To make drugs cheaper by saying, hey, let's buy it from Canada, or let's buy it from Europe, let's buy it from other countries that, you know, actually sell it for much, much cheaper. That'll save Americans money. That actually save the government money. Now, right now, according to the International Business Times, and David Sirota wrote a great piece on this, and I'm going to quote him here. He said, under existing law, drug makers are permitted to produce pharmaceuticals in other countries abroad and then import them into the United States. So that's a scam, right? So they go, and these pharmaceutical companies, you know, Merck and whatever, I can't think of a lot of examples of them right off the top of my head. But they will go and they will make these drugs in Canada, for example. Let's use Canada as an example, right? They'll manufacture them there. So that means Canadian jobs, right? And then they'll import the drugs back into the United States, where they will sell them at a higher cost to where they sell them to people in Canada. So people in Canada pay less for the same drug that people in America pay much, much more for here in America. Because we don't allow the companies to import those drugs back. Or we do allow the companies, actually, but we don't allow the consumer. So I misspoke there. Now, like I said, the problem here is that the companies can re-import those drugs because it's their drugs, right? But consumers and people who distribute those drugs are not able to. Now, the current law prohibits consumers and pharmaceutical wholesalers from doing the same. Because of that, these companies obviously can sell drugs at a more expensive rate, driving up the cost for both us and the government, consumers. Now, conservatives, funny enough, they like to complain about the cost of socialized medicine. Well, this is one of the reasons that socialized medicine is actually expensive. Right now, we can't import these drugs from other countries, and we also can't negotiate, Medicare can't negotiate drug prices with pharmaceutical companies using the leverage of the government. So they have been banned from being able to do that to save money. That's interesting. So, and again, back to how they like to complain about the cost. They don't actually want to do anything to bring down the cost, because when they do, they lose their biggest talking point. Oh, it costs too much. It costs, you can't do it, can't do it. Well, okay, well, let's bring down the cost, and then we can do it. And actually, we can do it right now. And it's actually, it would be cheaper under a Medicare for All system, not only for the government, of course, but for the consumer as well, who would just end up paying money out of their taxes. Their money doesn't have to go to advertising fees or executive bonuses or any of the other waste that's inherent in a for-profit system, administrative wastes. So, but anyway, so without established, right, here comes Bernie Sanders, along with 21 other Democratic lawmakers. So, you know, they came in and they introduced a plan to simply let Americans import drugs from other countries. Now, how much cheaper would it be? No, again, I keep talking about, oh, it's going to be cheaper. It's going to be, okay, Jeff, here's some numbers, right? Oh, okay. The CBO estimates that the change would, in total, reduce federal government drug spending by more than $6.8 billion over the next 10 years, including a reduction of $5.1 billion in direct spending and roughly $1.7 billion in increased revenue. Now, this is a change that even Republicans can get in favor of. Now, remember, one of the people who voted for the Sanders Amendment and the Sanders bills was Republican Ted Cruz. Now, he's a Canadian. And maybe it's like, well, he was a Canadian. Formerly a Canadian dual citizen. No longer, of course. Even he's like, dude, that doesn't make any sense. Just allow them to import drugs. Freedom. Whatever argument you want to use as a conservative to justify this, I don't really care. Because it's good policy, whether you look at it from the framing of a right-winger or a left-winger. It's just good policy. It's going to save a lot of money. Wonderful. Now, of course, as I've reported before, corporate Democrats and corporate Republicans, well, they killed it. They got together. They didn't like this change. They get funded by the pharmaceutical companies, as I'm going to show you. And they got together and they killed this. Now, among the Democrats who voted against this was potential 2020 contender, maybe not potential anymore, Senator Cory Booker. Now, Booker, of course, he's from senator from New Jersey. That is a state that is home to several major pharmaceutical companies, including Bayer, Johnson & Johnson, and Merck. As The Intercept reported, Booker's argument for voting against the measure was the same as that of the primary pharmaceutical trade organization, the Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America, or when you shorten it up, PhRMA. Yeah, again, this is we call them Big Pharma as a pejorative, obviously, and they're like, oh yeah, that's interesting. We're just gonna call our trade group PhRMA. That's fun. Now, of course, both Booker and pharmaceutical representatives from those trade groups say that, oh, drugs from Canada, well, we can't import them because they're not safe enough. Now, nobody was buying that excuse, as we point out. You think that Canada has more lax standards? Canada's to the left of us. Now, you could argue, some Canadians would probably argue with, hey, we're not that far left. I mean, we had Rob Ford in Toronto. Okay, hey, fair enough. But nonetheless, from an American perspective, you guys are lefties. Just saying. And that just shows you, of course, how far right America has actually gotten. So, but regardless, it's funny to think that since Canada is so far to the left, they believe in big government, big regulation, socialized medicine, all that stuff, that their pharmaceutical drugs would have less sufficient safety standards than American drugs. That is comical. Nobody believed it. Nobody bought it. Okay. And as Sirota notes, some drugs sold in the United States are in fact fully manufactured overseas. So they're completely made overseas, and then they're imported anyway. But they're imported through the company. The company can import it. It's their drugs, right? Their factory makes it over in, I don't know, Belgium, China, Ireland, you name it, right? The UK, Canada. And they import it here for themselves, and then they jack up the price and sell it for even more money to Americans. So that's a weird excuse, right? And not only that, but some drugs that are made in the United States, you know, because people might be wondering about those. Well, those are made in the United States, but actually have some foreign ingredients that they bring in from other countries. So not even that. And this is according to numbers from the Food and Drug Administration. Now, the thing about that completely destroyed Cory Booker's argument is that when you manufacture drugs overseas and you bring them in, well, the FDA already has a robust mechanism for inspecting drugs that come into us from other countries. So they already inspect this. They already, know what's going on here. So to say that they're completely unsafe or they don't fit our standards is absolutely ridiculous. But of course, you already know all this, or at least you're already aware. The real reason that he fought against this amendment and the bill was because of how much money he got from the pharmaceutical industry. In the 2014 election, when Booker ran for Senate, he had actually the highest total, over $220,000, in campaign donations from the pharmaceutical manufacturing industry of any member of Congress. So, man, he's rolling in that big pharma money. He loves it. And look, as I said, New Jersey has a lot of these drug manufacturers in it. And they, of course, have a huge influence in local elections. So, they threw $100,000 or a couple $100,000 towards Cory Booker, and he's like, oh, yeah, pharmaceutical companies. Ooh, yeah, you know what? The drugs that they make here are fantastic. But don't you dare go and import those unsafe drugs from other countries, even though they're actually manufactured in other countries and just imported here through the drug companies. So, but no, he's like, I'm just looking out for my constituent. I'm just looking out for the people. No, you're not. Now, after, of course, intense pressure from progressives and the huge backlash, Booker's like, oh, you know what? Oh, that whole thing about not importing drugs. You know what? I'm actually in favor. I'm super progressive. Vote for me. And he teamed up with Bernie Sanders and other Democrats to sponsor the Affordable and Safe Prescription Drug Importation Act in February, which he said, well, had alleviate his concerns about safety. Okay, fair enough. Now, that, of course, did not eliminate all Democratic Party opposition to the initiative. During May deliberations over an FDA authorization bill, Sanders and Democratic Senator Bob Casey and Elizabeth Warren had proposed an amendment allowing for the importation of drugs from FDA-approved facilities in Canada. So that's what I was talking about. Where it's like, oh, we put some extra assurances in here, so now they have to be FDA approved, and we can still get them from Canada, and that'll still cut the cost of prescription medicine by quite a bit. It'll save Americans a lot of money. But this also goes to, you have these safety concerns. Well, we just hopefully have allayed those concerns. Did it go through? The amendment was, of course, laden with protections, according to Casey, but Democrats Patty Murray and Michael Bennet, two big beneficiaries of pharma campaign cash, voted against it in committee, and it failed 13-10. Look, I know some Democrats or some people will say, hey, money, that's got no impacts on votes whatsoever. I mean, I've never seen anybody be impacted, any votes be impacted by somebody giving them campaign contributions. I mean, that just doesn't happen. I mean, it's just speech, right? These companies, all they're doing is they're just talking, right? They don't actually impact the votes at all. This is an example of money impacting votes. Do you think those representatives would have looked at that bill that actually had a lot of protections in there to make sure that these drugs were actually safe to import? You think they looked at that and said, it's still not enough. Sorry, we need to go back to the drawing board. No, what they did is that they looked at that and they said, yeah, that's fine. But I got to look at the money that I'm getting from the pharmaceutical industry. And I think that's far more important to me, because that's going to allow me to get re-election. All that's going to do is to save the American taxpayer money. I don't really care about that. No, I care about getting my legalized bribes. Okay. The pharmaceutical company basically told them, if you vote for this, you're not going to get campaign contributions and you're going to lose your elections. Sorry. Look, do you think that these people voted in favor of the pharmaceutical industry because they believed that the drugs were unsafe and that they were just accepting that money out of the goodness of their hearts, or the pharmaceutical company was giving that money out of the goodness of their hearts? No, they wanted something in return. They always want something in return. And that is votes that happen to favor them. This is corruption. And it's a good example of the floodgates essentially being open to more of that corruption. Now, it's actually gotten worse too. And some of the highest levels that we've seen in decades. According to a Kaiser News Health analysis, campaign spending by the pharmaceutical industry has only skyrocketed within the last few years. Congressional donations from pharmaceutical PACs are up 11% as compared to a similar time frame in 2015 alone. And donations to ranking members of health-related committees have risen by 80% from 2 years ago. So just within the last couple of years, it has ramped up. Lobbying from those same industry groups like pharma are also on the rise. Look, there was no real reason to keep us from buying imported prescription drugs. It's not about safety. It's all about profit, and it's all about greed, and it always has been. And now we have proof that this would save lots of money and would also, of course, not be any more dangerous than the drugs we already have imported, since they import it the same way. Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more like this, please hit the subscribe button below. And if you want to support truly independent progressive media, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/TYTNation.